Yesterday, we began to speak about the Kodshim, and then we moved on to discuss the Mizbe'ach. And Bekitzer, we said that there are four parts of the Mizbe'ach that are absolutely critical. There's the Yesod on the bottom. On the other side, there's a Kevesh. And then we go up to the fact that we require Ribua. Ribua, you remember, it's got to be perfectly square. And we spoke about the chronos, the corners of the Mizbeach on top. Now, we mentioned that, again, just to mention Bekitzer, there are many different names to the Mizbeach HaChitzon. It's called the Mizbeach HaChitzon, it's called the Mizbeach HaOla in the Tanakh, it's called the Mizbeach HaNechoshes, or it's also called the Mizbeach HaAdam. Now, we mentioned yesterday that because of the historical significance of the Mokom HaMizbeach that dates back all the way to Adam HaRishon, to Cain and Hevel, to Noach, to Avram, to the whole history, therefore we have to be very careful about locating the Mizbeach exactly where it should be, because that's the Mokom that is Gorim. It gives it a special status. Now, when David HaMelech purchased land from what's called Goren Arona, and that's where he would build the Beis HaMikdash, he would instruct his son Shlomo to build the Beis HaMikdash. He wanted to make sure that the Mizbeach would be in the right place. So we have a Masorah, a tradition, that David HaMelech designated to Shlomo the exact location of the Mizbeach in the Goren Arona, and that would be the place where, as we said before, the whole history, including Akedas Yitzchak. Now we have a Machlokes Tanoim. Okay, this is a sugya in Masechtas Vach. One shita is, and this, if you like me to announce the page again, as I said, from Mizbeach, we go back to page 1. So we're still on page 1. Kulo Bitzfon HaZorah. It's got to be in the northern part of the Azorah. So that means when I enter into the Azorah, I turn to the right. That's the place where the Kodshim are going to be slaughtered. And that's where the Mizbeach should be, on the north side. The other man, the Omer says, no. Chetzio B'tzafon. And although part of it should be in the north, but nevertheless it should be Chetzio B'darom. Part of it, an equal part, should be in the south, which would mean that it's equidistant from the northern to the southern sections. Or, according to that second opinion, that rejects Safon, it should be Rubo B'darom. So you really end up with three logical possibilities. One is that it's Kulo B'tzafon. The other is that it's Chetzio B'tzafon, Chetzio B'darom. And the third possibility is that it's mostly B'darom, which reminds us very much of the menorah. The menorah was actually in the Darom, but that's again in the Heichal. We're now in the Azorah. How do we paskin la'alocha? So the Rambam, in the 5th chapter of Hilchas Beis HaBechira, when he codifies the laws of the Beis HaMikdash, he paskins that the Mizbeach is Rubo B'darom Umiuto B'tzafon. He paskins like that, one of those three scenarios, in which it's mostly on the south side, just a little bit on the north side. It's almost as if, according to this Psak Halach, we have to touch base with the tzafon because of such significance in terms of the shechita of Kodshim in the tzafon. But once the Mizbeach has a base that is on the north, then the real makom for the Mizbeach, meaning Rov and the Mizbeach, is on the south side. Okay. Now, what was the material used to make up the Mizbeach? First of all, We don't make a Mizbe'ach out of what's called a binyan shel avonim. No, it's just stones to make a Mizbe'ach. That we don't do. And we'll try to understand why, and it has to do with matzeva and avodah zarah and different kinds of things. Also, ein osim es hamizbeach otum kulo lelo chalal klal. We don't take parts, whatever the material is, and compress them together in such a way that there's no airspace inside the mizbeach. But rather, what do? First of all, we take stones and we do what's called a yitzikas zephes. Zephes in English is, I think, sulfur, right? So you put sulfur on top of stones, and on top of that you put ophares, which is lead, molten lead, and on top of that sid, which is lime, that solidifies the mizbeach. And what kind of stones do you use in this mixture? Avonim lachos. Again, we're not talking about the size of the stone. The size of the stone doesn't bother me one way or the other. It could be large stones, it could be small stones, but we need lachos. Now, what does lachos mean? He's very vague about it. He says that yischabru yachtov v'yasu kulam gud guf echad. He says that although the stones comprise the most important primary element in the Mizbeach, but nevertheless they're individual stones. And what we need is a chibur yachat, she'asu guf echad, that these stones should be connected. And that's where we add the yitzika. Yitzika means the zephes and the sid, all that we pour on top of the even, and that solidifies them to make it miksha achas. Again, it's a very original idea that the Mizbeach has to be miksha achas. We know that miksha achas is required by the Torah, but not with regard to Mizbeach. Miksha achas is a requirement with regard to the menorah or with regard to the chatzotzros. The smaller kalim have to be made miksha, hammered out from one piece of metal. The cheruvim, right? The cheruvim also had to have miksha achas. But the mizbeach, that's a chiddush. And as I mentioned to you yesterday, that makes it very similar to tefillin, both of which are ribua. They have the square, and you connect them all together to make it miksha achas. Then he says the following. The Torah says with regard to the Mizbeach, lo tonif olav barza. We don't put a sword or any sort of metal substance directly onto the Mizbeach. But what about the structure of the Mizbeach? When I create the Mizbeach, here too, we apply the principle that we don't use any metal. So that when we take the ground and the stones to create the Mizbeach, it should be karka shelo chafru ba me'olam. It's virgin land. It's never been plowed. And shelo hunaf aleim barza. Now, again, I don't know exactly how you're going to make that determination. Who's going to whisper in your ears that this karka never had metal on top? But circumstances seem to indicate there was no battleground here where people were running around with swords. And we can assume if it's virgin ground and it's never been used, there was no plow, there was no metal plow that went into the land. Even shenoga aleha barzel psula. If we can determine that this particular stone had hanofas barzel, meaning there was some metal utensil that was used with regard to the stone, on top of the stone, it now becomes completely possible. He says, Hatam, Shechmira Hatova B'Dover Zeh Barzel Postel Levin B'Mizbe'ach, Afilu B'Nigioso, Hu Mishum Shebarzel Nivra Lekatzer Yom Shel Adam, and Mizbe'ach Nivra Kedei Laharich Yomov Shel Adam. Eino B'Din Shei Munaf Dover Hamakatzer Chaim Al Dover Hamarich Es HaChaim. And that's codified in a Mishnah in the third parak of Midos. You have something that cuts down the years of one's life, and that's barzel. It's used as a sword, a weapon in a military campaign. And that's antithetical to the Mizbe'ach, the purpose of which is to bring kapara, and that is to be marichai, to extend one's lifestyle. Okay. Now we have a different psul in the Avnei HaMizbeach, and that's called pgima. The Evan has to be shlema, and no part of the Evan was chipped off. If you chip off part of the Evan, it's excluded, it's disqualified for the Mizbeach. Now, if you take stones from a river, from a body of water, then it seems that there's a much higher likelihood that the stone might have, during its lifetime in the water, in the maritime, it may have become pguma. So we'd rather take stones from natural quarries, and we will see if we can determine that it is a shlema and not a pguma. Pegima, poselis es avonim lizbech afilu b'kdei chagiras tziporen. Imagine you take the nail of your finger and you scratch something. It's already considered pogum in the case of the Avnei HaMizbeach. Okay, so now you've gotten to the point where you've determined that these avonim are shlemos, they're not pgumos, they're lachos, and no one put any metal on top of the avonim. We're ready to get going. But we need one thing, and that's sid, as we said before, to put lime on top of the stones, and that's called liyasedes hamizbeach b'sid. And it seems that the lime had a white color, like plaster and so forth. And every so often, they would have to re-whiten it, give it another paint job. How often did they do this? Twice a year, every 6 months. They were malabein es ha'avonim. Now, we get to the sugya of midos hamizbeach. It's a big sugya. We'll just touch on the tip of the iceberg. First, we start from the bottom and we move up. The Yesod HaMizbeach, which protruded beyond the Mizbeach itself, was 32 amma square, 32 amma in length, 32 amma in width. Now, the next level going up is called the Sovev. And what we're doing, it's one square on the bottom and then another square, which is shorter, I guess I could use that word, or smaller. And that's the second level, the square, which is called the Sovev. And the difference between the two is 2 amos. So whereas the Yesod is 32 amos, the Sovev is 30 amma by 30 amma. We're building like a pyramid as we go higher and higher. Now the Sovev rises up for 5 amos. We'll soon see why, what the significance of the number 5 is. Now we get to the upper square of the Mizbe'ach, which we call the Gag HaMizbe'ach. That also requires Ribua. And that's 28 amas on 28 amas. So we went from 32 to 30 to 28. At each one of these 3 levels going up, we reduced it by 2 amas. Now we said that the height of the Sovev was 5 amas. The height of the Gag HaMizbe'ach is 3 amas. So let's just figure this out. We started with the Yesod, and that gives us, let's say, 1 amma. Then we went up to the Sovev, which is 5 amas. Now we went up to the upper part of the Mizbeach, and we said it is 3 amas. So how many amas do we have together? We have 1, 5, and 3. So 1 second. What did I miss here? So again, Sovev is 5. The Gag is 3. And the Yesod is 1. So that's 9. So what's the total height of the Mizbeach from the floor to the ceiling? It's 9 amos. Now, usually we like to round things off at the number 10. And the Rambam is very bothered by the fact that the height of the Mizbeach is only 9 amos. So what the Rambam does here, he pulls a fast one on us, and he says that on the top of on the Gag and the Mizbeach, we have 4 kronos. Each keren has to be 1 amma in height. We add that 1 amma to the other 9, we round it off at 10. And that makes the Rambam very happy. So that's the amma of the kronos HaMizbeach. And the Rambam writes that the Gova Mizbeach, the height of the Mizbeach, is 10 amos. Mehen Bi'ama bas chamisha tfachim, mehen bi'ama shel shisha tfachim. All right, this is complicated. Where do we talk about this? At the beginning of Erev, you may remember that there are 2 types of amos. There's a 5 tfachim amma and there's a 6 tfachim amma. Okay, so this is complicated. But in any event, let's talk for a moment about the Mizbeach HaChitzon in the first Beis HaMikdash as opposed to the Mizbeach HaChitzon in the second Beis HaMikdash. In the first Beis HaMikdash, right, you'll see that the Torah calls that our Mizbeach a Mizbeach HaNechoshes. That's because it was plated with copper. So it was basically wood, copper plated. And it seems like that Migdash, the first, really takes you all the way up till Shlomo Melech, because we had many different Mishkanos. We had a Mishkan in the Midbar, and then a Mishkan in Nova Gimon, a Mishkan in Shiloh, and then Nova Gimon, etc. And here the Mizbeach was basically made of wood and covered with nechoshes. Now, when we get to the Beis Hamikdash, then the Mizbe'ach is no longer made of eights of wood, it's made of even, of stone. On top of the stone, we have sid, as we discussed earlier. So there's really a fundamental difference here between all the Mishkanos and the Mikdash. It doesn't speak here about Bayis Sheni, so I'm not sure. I'm not sure if anything changes in Bayis Sheni. So if I would ask you quiz you, how tall is the Mizbeach? And one of you will tell me it's 9 amos, and the other you tell me it's 10 amos, you're both right. Because the Mizbeach is 9 amos high when you combine the Yesod with the Sovev and with the Gaga Mizbeach. But we add an extra Amma when we consider the height of the Kronos. What is the Mizbeach made of? So if you gave me an answer it's made of eights, you'd be right. If you gave me an answer it's made of Even, you'd be right. If you gave me the answer that the Mishkanos, up until Shlomo HaMelech's Migdash, the Mizbeach was made of wood, that would be correct. I'm always assuming you give me the correct answer. And if I asked you about the Beis HaMikdash and you told me it was a Mizbeach Vavanim, you'd be right. And then we have to ask about the tzipui, what went on top of either the eights in the case of the Mishkan or the Even in the case of the Mikdash. In the case of the Mishkan, it was Nechoches. And in the case of the Mikdash, it was Sid. Zephes and Sid. He says, Mizbeach shebe Mishkan, haya asui me'etz u'metzupe nechoches. Shebe Mikdash, binyan shal even u'mesuyad besid lavan, white lawn. Midos shitcho shel Mizbeach shebe Mishkan, tanos heim biharbe, she'erko arko v'rochbo hayu 5 amos by 5 amos. Wow, that's a lot smaller than the Mikdash. He says, Begova shovim hayu, shneim eser amos imakronos, Mizbeach shebe Mishkan haisabo madura achashal eish, b'Mishkan hayu michbar, hu reshes nechoshes she hikifa es ha-Mizbeach ba'emtza, ובמקדש כנגד זה היה רק חוט הסיקרה. So what separated the top part of the Mizbeach from the bottom? In the Mishkan, it was something called a michbar, which is a reshes nechoshes, some sort of almost a mat or how would you say reshes in English? What's the word? A screen. Okay, I think we could use that word. So there's a copper screen in the middle. And in the Migdash, there was a chut hasikra, like a red belt, sort of, that divided up the top of the Mizbeach from the bottom. Mizbe'ach shebemigdal mishkan hoyabo karkuv usheka rachav bi'ama b'mizbe'ach shalom mich. Okay, I was hoping to see a diagram here. I don't see this diagram. So let's just see where we got up to. We're talking now about the midos of the Mizbeach, and we're going to go through each part of the Mizbeach and see how wide it is and how tall it is. We'll start with the Yesod HaMizbeach and Mitzvah Shem tomorrow.